The Western world has been shaped by several definitions, including geographical and other factors. Originally, it was to separate Europe from other geographical locations including the Middle East and South Asia, although this is no longer a primary definition as Australia, New Zealand and USA are all included in the West. According to the National Government website, there are many types of schools in the UK. These include faith schools, free schools, academies, city technology schools and private schools. On top of this, there are schools that operate under romantic ideologies of education, such as Montessori schools. Education in the UK has seen a paradigm change in recent decades with an increasing neoliberal approach since the 1970s. According to Professor West and Dr. Wolfe of the London School of Economics and Political Science, 22% of all primary schools and a staggering 68% of all secondary schools are now academies rather than maintained by the local authority. According to Hugo Redis and John Furlong, neoliberalism is a key driving factor behind the growing significance of globalisation, and through the use of teacher education, the government are driving the country towards a neoliberalist education system. In Hill and Kumar's 2012 book, Global Neoliberalism, Education and Its Consequences, they claim neoliberal approaches mould discourse in order to achieve their capital goal, and further this by stating population-pleasing phrases such as education for all are in fact of diminishing importance for the state. Further worrying information by Hill and Kumar claim that after riding high in an economic boom, India are following trends of state disengagement of education, despite incredibly high illiteracy, high school dropouts and inaccessible facilities. As previously mentioned, recent studies have found 68% of all secondary schools in the UK are now academies. According to Davies and Bensall, it's hard to exactly define what neoliberalism is. However, in education systems, school and schooling is used to create a new moral order to produce a student appropriate to the economy. In order to allow the schools to individually tailor their curriculum to coincide with the local and international economic needs, the government allowed academies full control. According to a 2016 government website, they claim academies have had a positive impact on overall student grades. However, an independent fact-checking charity claim academy performance is mixed and there have been no substantial difference in student attainment. Since the 1970s, neoliberalism has been a dominant economic and political philosophy in Western governments. Barnett and Bagshaw and Cliff Duran describe the three main strategies of neoliberalism as privatisation, competitive markets and reduced public expenditure on infrastructure. Duran furthers this by claiming neoliberalism is a downsizing of the state with the rationale of social benefit spending hampering growth. Education has been a key driver of these main strategies, with international competition constantly on the minds of education experts nationwide. Domestically, we continue to see competitive markets as yearly university rankings are published to determine where one may receive the highest level of education. But has this style worked globally? The World Bank claims that poverty rates are declining, however this is widely disputed, with Donnelly explaining China has undergone the highest level of poverty reduction, hardly operating under a neoliberal regime. So why choose neoliberalism? There are many benefits that must be understood regarding neoliberalism before we decide it has failed. Fox, Rogers and Murphy explain that although neoliberalism can be used to gain political and economic power for their own ends, it can be viewed as a tool employed to empower local communities. This is further supported by the UK government when they state academies can bring communities close to the schools and more involved with their child's education. This is done by the state removing itself from certain economic ventures and the private sector more heavily relied on. Fox, Rogers and Murphy further claim that the fluidity of neoliberalism can be used to its advantage and has helped to evolve the ideology over the decades. Rather than a single style political strategy, neoliberalism can evolve and become what is needed of it, with varieties including religious and secular neoliberalism as well as Ordonez neoliberalism operated by post-war Germany. In Cahill's 2012 work, he questions a much simpler approach. Having survived decades of critique, crisis and resistance, the fact neoliberalism is still of use globally means there must be positive results. As previously mentioned, one key strategy of neoliberalism is competitive markets. Mudge claims that the success of neoliberal approach can rest on the supremacy of market competition, education being no different, with more detail and emphasis being placed on PISA scores and education reviews. Derek Gillard explains how education in the UK has improved since the 1960s with gradual progression, however this isn't always evidenced in the rankings table. According to PISA 2015, Asia dominated the score for mathematics and reading, with Singapore scoring an average of 564 and 535 respectively. The UK recorded a mean score of 493 in mathematics and 500 in reading, putting them way behind the pace, with 10 countries averaging at least 20 points more than the UK and 8 nations 10 points ahead. After seeing these concerning results, the UK decided to act in accordance and recover these scores, improving in the 2018 study, finding themselves moving from 22nd up to 14th globally, with maths having the largest individual improvement from 27th to 18th. According to OECD data, one way the UK government rectified the negative 2015 scores was by increasing the education budget, surprising given the neoliberal moves the UK government had previously taken to education. India is just one example of a country that has become increasingly neoliberal in recent decades, with political and economic changes happening quicker than some people can grasp. To the untrained eye, this has had a phenomenal impact on India's global influence and economy, with Angela Martin reporting the 7% annual GDP growth indicates a future of Indian prosperity. Furthermore, according to AJ Gudavarthi and Girdner and Siddiqui, poverty in India has been almost half. However, the World Bank argues persistent poverty is still rife among India and inequality is staggeringly high. AJ Gudavarthi further reporting the wealthiest 1% of Indian population owning 51.5% of the country's wealth, whilst the bottom 60% account for a measly 4.7%. Education is not excluded from India's new ideology, with Kassan explaining India sees reduced amount of spending with higher educational gains, closely following the neoliberal path. However, this comes at the cost of inequality, with these new policies offering on average boys an extra 2 years of education, whereas girls lose 18 months. Dr. Saran expands on this, claiming despite female roles in India growing and changing, this is at a very low ratio in comparison to males, with the female role still heavily reliant on reproduction and motherhood. More worrying is the deep-rooted lack of rights and self-awareness in many Indian women who were studied. However, it is not just gender inequality that remains rife under Indian neoliberal education policies. India has undergone cultural changes as a result of neoliberal education, following close patterns to what Davis and Bensall state neoliberal schooling is used for, moulding students to fit the economic needs. According to History.com, over 75% of Indians declare themselves as Hindu. This is due to the extensive history Hinduism shares with India, with some scholars agreeing that Hinduism originated in India. However, Sagar Singh emphasised in their study, Indian society today should be considered as an Indian civilization, not a Hindu civilization, moving away from a cultural ideology deep-rooted in Indian heritage. This was further highlighted by the 2009 election results, where the Hindu-driven BJP were beaten. According to Meera Nanda, this is proof that Indian voters have officially rejected the idea of India remaining a Hindu state. Due to the vast economic benefits, neoliberalism has been viewed as an attractive new political strategy changing the landscape of the modern world, with the Indian economic boom being just one of many examples. But discrepancies must be understood as to whether neoliberalism is the best solution for all people, not just the rich and powerful. Neoliberal education styles haven't achieved the desired level of results, with no significant nationwide positive results being shown, only minor improvements in some macro-level studies. And with reports flooding out of India claiming the Hindu identity is vanishing from the nation, you do have to question the logistics of neoliberalism.